You know, that's what a senior executive actually said when he found out just how much his own CEO, a guy named F. Ross Johnson, was about to make for himself on a deal that was putting thousands of jobs on the line. I mean, what a quote, right? It perfectly kicks off one of the absolute wildest stories in corporate history.
So let's dive right in. We are going back to the go-go 80s to break down the legendary, almost unbelievable leveraged buyout of a company called RJR Nabisco. And trust me, this was not just some boring business deal. This was a flat-out, bare-knuckle brawl that came to define an entire era of greed and ambition on Wall Street. But before it became this corporate battleground, RJR Nabisco was, well, it was a staple in pretty much every single American home. We're talking about a consumer goods empire. I mean, think about it. Oreos, the cookies you dunked in milk, Ritz crackers, the ones you served at parties, even the cigarettes a lot of people smoked back then. This company wasn't just a stock ticker, it was a slice of Americana. And sitting on the throne of this empire was F. Ross Johnson. This guy was the quintessential 80s CEO. He was charming, larger than life, and absolutely infamous for his extravagant spending, all on the company's dime, of course. He had his own corporate Air Force, they called it the RJR Air Force, and lived this playboy lifestyle where the line between business and pleasure, well, it was pretty much erased. But here's the turn. The company's stock price, it was totally flat. And investors, they were starting to get really restless. So that whole happy facade of beloved brands and corporate jets was actually hiding some pretty serious problems. Johnson knew he needed a big win, and he needed it fast. And that big win, it was supposed to be this revolutionary new product, the premier smokeless cigarette. The company poured hundreds of millions of dollars into developing it, but it was a complete and total disaster. People in the test markets absolutely hated it. They said it tasted awful, that it was hard to light. Basically, it was a billion-dollar flop. And with his big idea literally up in smoke, Johnson was backed into a corner. So he turns to one of the most powerful and honestly one of the most controversial financial tools of the 1980s, the leveraged buyout, or LBO. The simplest way to think about it is like buying a house with a giant mortgage. You put down a little bit of your own cash, you borrow a ton of money for the rest, and you use the asset you're buying, in this case the entire company, as the collateral for that massive loan. And Johnson, well, he decided to go big, really big. He secretly put together a plan with his management buddies and some bankers at Shearson Lehman Hutton to take RJR Nabisco private. And their opening offer? A staggering $17 billion. He thought it was a price so high, so absolutely outrageous, that no one else would even dare to compete. Oh, he was wrong, so wrong. The second that bid was announced, it set off an earthquake on Wall Street. The deal was so huge, with so much debt, that it immediately got the attention of the press and even Congress. And more importantly, it painted a giant target on RJR Nabisco's back. It was like blood in the water. And this is where the story gets really personal. See, we have to introduce Henry Kravis, a co-founder of the LBO powerhouse Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, better known as KKR. Now, Johnson had actually talked to Kravis about a buyout idea earlier, but then he ghosted him and went to a rival firm. Kravis felt completely betrayed, and he was not about to just sit back and let Johnson walk away with the biggest prize on all of Wall Street. The whole thing got so nasty that other bidders started jumping in. One of them, a guy named Ted Forstman, saw KKR's aggressive tactics and their use of high-risk junk bonds as basically a hostile invasion. And he's the one who famously said they needed to push the Barbarians back from the city gates. And just like that, the biggest corporate battle in history had its iconic name. And would you look at how fast things just spiraled out of control? Just 4 days after Johnson's initial offer, KKR comes over the top and blows it out of the water. Johnson's dream of a quiet little private deal totally shattered. RJR Nabisco was now officially up for auction to the highest bidder. The war was on. This was KKR's opening shot. Over $20 billion. It was a crystal clear message to Johnson: we're here and we are not playing around. Of course, Johnson's team fires back, pushing the price tag up again. The numbers were just becoming astronomical, ballooning every few days as these massive egos and ambitions clashed. And then came the final, just mind-boggling number: $25 billion. At the time, it was the largest corporate takeover in the history of the world. The price had been driven to a level that just weeks earlier, nobody would have thought was even possible.
But on the final day, the decision wasn't just about the biggest number. This is where it gets tricky. As you can see here, Johnson's management group actually offered more per share, $112. But, and this is a big but, their deal was a super complex mix of cash and these weird securities. KKR's offer was a little lower at $109, but it was simpler and seen as a much safer bet for the shareholders. The board had a really tough choice to make. And then, in a totally stunning twist, the board rejected their own CEO. They chose KKR. The Raiders had breached the gates. F. Ross Johnson, the guy who started this whole insane mess to save his job and make a fortune, had just lost control of his own company. But winning came at a truly tremendous cost. This chart basically shows you the mountain of debt KKR loaded onto the company to make the deal happen. Nearly $25 billion. That American icon, the company that made Oreos and Ritz crackers, was now one of the most indebted companies in the entire world. So, with the deal done, KKR immediately got to work with this brutal efficiency. They brought in a new CEO, the legendary Lou Gerstner from American Express, and their playbook was crystal clear. They started selling off those beloved brands one by one. They slashed costs. The company that Johnson had built was just being systematically dismantled to pay down that mountain of debt. And while RJR Nabisco was being carved up for parts, well, the bankers, the lawyers, and the advisors who put this whole deal together, they all walked away with an absolute fortune. Nearly $1 billion in fees were paid out to a tiny circle of Wall Street insiders. But the story didn't quite end there. Angry shareholders sued the board's advisors, arguing they got terrible advice on which final bid to accept. And a landmark case actually came out of it, which for the very first time made investment bankers directly liable to shareholders if they were negligent. The rules of the game on Wall Street were changed forever because of this. And you know, for KKR, the victory ended up being pretty bitter. The tobacco business, which was supposed to be this endless cash cow to pay down the debt, got absolutely hammered by intense price wars. The deal never became the golden goose they dreamed it would be. The Barbarians had won the castle, but they found the treasury was a lot emptier than they expected. The long-term impact on the whole market was pretty profound. The RJR Nabisco deal really became the high watermark for those super risky debt-fueled LBOs of the 1980s. The fallout was so bad that it brought in a new era of caution. And as you can see from the data, the rate of bankruptcies for these kinds of deals dropped a lot in the years that followed. And in the end, this whole saga became so much more than just a business story. It became a cultural touchstone, a true cautionary tale of ego, ambition, and the absolute excesses of an era, immortalized in the famous book and movie, Barbarians at the Gate. Which really leaves us with one final thought. When you look at the world of private equity and these multi-billion-dollar buyouts today, you just have to wonder, was the fight for RJR Nabisco the spectacular end of an era? Or was it just the beginning?